They laughed when the single dad touched the dead Bugatti. 7 minutes later, not one of them would remember the joke they had just made. The Grand Exhibition Hall in Scottsdale, Arizona buzzed with nervous energy beneath rows of brilliant white lights. Cameras hung from steel trusses overhead. Reporters moved between clusters of executives. Technicians hurried past computer stations with tablets pressed against their chests. In the center of it all sat a machine that looked less like a car and more like a sculpture carved from black glass and ambition. The Bugatti Noir Eternity was worth nearly $18 million. Some called it priceless. Others called it cursed. For 10 days, the world's best specialists had surrounded it. Engineers from Europe, master mechanics from California, diagnostic consultants charging thousands of dollars an hour. They had scanned every circuit, analyzed every sensor, replaced components that cost more than most American homes, and still the car remained silent. No ignition, no response, no life. Every failed attempt only attracted more attention. What began as a technical problem had become a public spectacle. Financial networks covered it. Automotive channels streamed updates around the clock. Social media exploded with theories. Millions of people watched experts argue while a machine worth a fortune sat motionless under spotlights. Across the room, Victoria Sterling stood near the presentation platform, her arms folded tightly. At 38, she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to solving impossible problems. CEO of Sterling Automotive Group, owner of one of the most influential luxury automotive brands in America, Victoria rarely showed frustration. Today was different. The exhaustion around her eyes told a story she would never admit publicly. Beside her stood Dr. Adrian Cross, the celebrated specialist leading the recovery effort. His tailored suit looked untouched despite 10 days of stress. His voice remained polished. His confidence remained intact. "We've exhausted every known possibility," he announced to a group of journalists. At this point, the issue may be deeper than anyone anticipated. A few reporters scribbled notes. Others adjusted microphones. The crowd listened carefully because Adrian Cross was the kind of expert people trusted, the kind whose opinions became headlines. Near the back entrance, unnoticed by nearly everyone, a faded blue pickup truck rolled quietly into the service area. Its engine rattled softly before shutting down. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out carrying a small cardboard box. Ethan Walker looked nothing like the people gathered inside. His work boots were worn. His jeans carried traces of grease from another long day at his garage. A delivery invoice stuck halfway out of his shirt pocket. He wasn't there for interviews. He wasn't there for publicity. He was simply delivering a specialty component someone had ordered days earlier. The kind of errand that barely paid enough to cover gas money. As Ethan crossed the hall, he glanced toward the famous Bugatti. Most people saw a masterpiece. Most people saw status. Ethan heard something else. Silence. A strange kind of silence. The kind that made experienced mechanics uncomfortable. His eyes lingered for only a second before he continued walking. Nearby, several technicians noticed him. One smirked. Another exchanged a knowing grin. To them, Ethan looked like exactly what he appeared to be. A small-town mechanic carrying parts into a room full of elite professionals. Someone whispered something. A few chuckles followed. Ethan ignored it. He had spent most of his life being underestimated. The laughter barely registered anymore. Yet across the crowded hall, a young girl sitting near the media section happened to notice him. Lily Walker watched her father from a distance, clutching a sketchbook against her chest. Her eyes followed him carefully as he disappeared among people who never seemed to notice men like him. Above them, television screens displayed the same headline over and over again. 10 days. $600,000. Still dead. And somewhere beneath the bright lights, expensive suits, and endless expert opinions, a quiet shift was beginning to unfold. Most people in that hall would never remember the part number printed on the small cardboard box Ethan Walker carried. They would never remember the supplier, the invoice, or the delivery schedule. But years later, some of them would remember seeing him walk across that polished floor with his head down and his shoulders relaxed, completely unaware that every assumption in the room was about to be tested. Ethan handed the package to a technician near the service entrance and signed the delivery form with a pen that barely worked. The technician glanced at him for less than a second before turning back toward the glowing screens surrounding the silent hypercar. Ethan simply nodded, and started walking away. That was usually how his days went. People noticed the work, rarely the man doing it. Outside, the Arizona sun hung low over the parking lot, casting long shadows across rows of luxury vehicles worth more than most neighborhoods. Ethan climbed into his aging pickup and sat quietly behind the wheel. For a moment, he did not start the engine. His eyes drifted toward the exhibition center's glass walls. Through them, he could still see flashes of camera lights reflecting off the black Bugatti. He sighed softly, not because of the car, because of the memory it stirred. "Dad?" a gentle voice asked beside him. Lily looked up from her sketchbook. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight pouring through the windshield. "You are thinking again." Ethan smiled faintly. "Am I that obvious?" "Only when you stare at things for too long." He chuckled. "I guess I am." Lily closed her sketchbook and studied him carefully. At 10 years old, she understood far more than most people realized. Children who grow up with struggle often do. "Was it the car?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Maybe. Could you fix it?" The question hung between them. Ethan looked through the windshield once more. Then he started the truck. "That is not my problem to solve." Lily watched him for another second before nodding. She knew that answer. It was the same answer he gave whenever someone asked why he never talked about the years before the garage. The years before everything changed. The truck rolled out of the parking lot and merged onto a two-lane road lined with desert brush and distant mountains. The city slowly faded behind them. The air conditioning rattled weakly. The dashboard had a crack running across it. The fuel gauge never worked correctly. Yet somehow the truck kept going, much like its owner. 20 miles away sat Walker Automotive, a modest garage squeezed between an old feed store and a family-owned diner. The faded sign out front had survived rainstorms, dust storms, and more financial hardships than Ethan cared to count. Inside, the scent of motor oil mixed with warm concrete and old memories. It was not impressive. It was not modern, but it was theirs. Ethan switched on the lights and immediately noticed 3 unpaid invoices sitting on his desk. The electric bill rested beneath them. He rubbed the back of his neck. Numbers never lied. The garage was surviving, but barely. Another slow month could change everything. Across town, the atmosphere inside the exhibition center had grown heavier. Victoria Sterling stood before another group of consultants reviewing diagnostic reports. Every page seemed to offer a different theory. Every theory led nowhere. "Run the tests again," she said calmly. One engineer shifted uneasily. "We already have." "Then run them again." No anger. No raised voice. Just determination. Yet even she could feel confidence slipping away. Nearby, Adrian Cross addressed another media interview. His polished smile remained intact, but irritation had begun creeping into the corners of his expression. 10 days of failure had a way of exposing cracks no camera could hide. As reporters fired questions, one technician quietly approached him. "Sir, there is something unusual in the latest data." Adrian barely looked up, then added to the report. "But it does not fit any of our models." Adrian adjusted his tie. "Then your models are wrong." The technician stepped back, unconvinced. Across the room, Victoria overheard the exchange. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not difficult. Wrong. Like everyone was looking in the same direction while the answer sat somewhere else entirely. Outside, evening settled over Scottsdale. Streetlights flickered to life. Families gathered for dinner. Businesses closed their doors. And in a small garage far from television cameras and million-dollar diagnostics, Ethan Walker quietly repaired a customer's pickup truck while his daughter sat nearby, finishing homework beneath a desk lamp. The world saw specialists, executives, and experts fighting to solve an impossible mystery. Nobody noticed the man tightening bolts under fluorescent lights. Nobody noticed the old photograph tucked into a drawer beside his workbench. Nobody noticed the life he had left behind. But somewhere deep beneath layers of silence, sacrifice, and years of choosing family over recognition, a forgotten chapter of Ethan's story was beginning to stir. The next morning arrived with a pale desert sunrise spreading across the horizon like brushed gold. Ethan Walker was already awake before the first light touched the windows of his small house. The coffee maker hummed softly in the kitchen while he reviewed invoices at the table. Numbers stared back at him with quiet honesty. Rent for the garage. Utility payments. Supplier balances. Nothing dramatic. Just the steady pressure that comes from carrying responsibility year after year without complaint. Across from him, Lily ate cereal while sketching in her notebook. She had inherited her father's habit of noticing details other people missed. "You are worried," she said without looking up. Ethan smiled into his coffee cup. "You always say that." "Because it is usually true." He shook his head. "I am thinking." Lily finally looked at him. "That means yes." For a moment, both of them laughed. It was a small sound, but it filled the room with warmth. The kind of warmth that money could never buy. Several miles away, the atmosphere inside the exhibition center felt very different. The excitement from the first few days had disappeared. In its place hung frustration. Every expert had another theory. Every theory produced another failure. Screens displayed endless streams of technical data. Engineers moved between workstations carrying tablets and reports. Yet the silent machine remained unchanged. Victoria Sterling stood beside the vehicle, staring at its glossy black bodywork. Reflections from overhead lights moved across the surface like waves on dark water. It looked perfect. Too perfect. That bothered her. Machines usually left clues. This one seemed determined to keep its secrets. A senior engineer approached carefully. "We completed the overnight analysis." Victoria turned toward him. "And?" The engineer hesitated. "Nothing definitive." She closed her eyes briefly. "Again?" "Yes." Nearby, Adrian Cross stepped forward before the engineer could continue. "The issue is clearly deeper than conventional diagnostics." His voice carried the confidence that had made him famous. "We are dealing with a unique failure scenario." Victoria studied him silently. 10 days ago his certainty had been reassuring. Now it felt different. Less like confidence. More like pride. "How much longer?" she asked. Adrian straightened his jacket. "As long as it takes." The answer sounded impressive. It did not sound helpful. Back at the garage, Ethan spent most of the morning replacing a transmission in an aging pickup truck. Country music played softly from an old radio near the workbench. The familiar rhythm of tools and machinery helped quiet his thoughts. Usually, today was different. Several times he found himself remembering the Bugatti. Not because of its value, not because of its fame, because of a sound he never actually heard. Sometimes experienced mechanics developed instincts they could not explain. A feeling, a pattern, a subtle detail hiding beneath the obvious. Ethan had learned long ago to trust those instincts, which was exactly why he was trying to ignore them. Around noon, a customer entered the garage carrying a newspaper. The front page featured a large photograph of the stalled hypercar. "Can you believe this thing?" the man asked. Ethan glanced at the image. "Looks expensive. $18 million. The customer whistled. "They have spent 600 grand trying to fix it." Ethan returned to his work. "Sounds like they have the wrong problem." The customer laughed. "You think you know better than those experts?" Ethan tightened a bolt and shrugged. "No, I think machines do not care how important we are." The customer smiled politely, assuming it was a joke. Ethan did not explain. That evening, as the Arizona sky turned orange and purple beyond the garage doors, a black luxury SUV rolled quietly into the parking lot. Ethan barely noticed until the engine shut off. The vehicle looked wildly out of place beside rusted pickups and dusty work vans. Lily noticed first. She looked up from her homework. "Dad," she said softly, "someone important is here." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and turned toward the door. The SUV's rear passenger door opened slowly. A woman stepped out into the fading sunlight. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ethan recognized her immediately. Victoria Sterling. For a moment, the garage fell completely silent. The distant hum of traffic outside seemed to fade beneath the weight of an unexpected meeting. Victoria Sterling stood beside the black SUV, her tailored coat catching the last rays of the setting sun. This was not the environment she belonged to, not according to appearances. Yet there she was, standing on cracked concrete surrounded by old tools, dusty shelves, and the scent of engine oil. Ethan set the rag down slowly. Lily looked between them with wide eyes. Victoria offered a polite smile. "Mr. Walker." Ethan nodded once. "Ms. Sterling." Neither sounded surprised. Neither sounded comfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the evening air. Victoria glanced around the garage. Her eyes moved over aging equipment, repaired engines, and shelves packed with carefully labeled parts. Nothing about the place looked impressive. Everything about it looked honest. I hope I am not interrupting. Ethan shrugged. Depends on why you are here. The directness caught her slightly off guard. Most people softened their words around powerful executives. Ethan did not. Victoria respected that more than she expected. She took a breath. I need another opinion. Ethan almost smiled. You have already hired the best opinions money can buy. Apparently not. The answer came faster than she intended. For the first time, genuine frustration slipped through the polished image she showed the world. Ethan noticed. So did Lily. Victoria continued. 10 days. Hundreds of tests. Endless theories. Nothing. She paused. And yesterday, I overheard something. Ethan remained quiet. You said they might be solving the wrong problem. The garage seemed even quieter after those words. Ethan glanced toward the open service bay, then toward the floor. People say things. Most people do not say them the way you did. She studied him carefully. You looked at that vehicle for less than 10 seconds. Ethan folded his arms. What exactly are you asking? Victoria held his gaze. I want you to come back. The request hung in the air. Lily's eyes widened. Ethan's expression barely changed. Yet inside, something tightened. He had spent years building distance between himself and worlds like hers. Distance brought peace. Distance brought simplicity. Distance allowed him to focus on the one thing that mattered. His daughter. No, he said calmly. Victoria blinked. No. No. She looked genuinely surprised. People rarely rejected invitations from her. They certainly did not reject them that quickly. You have not even heard the offer. Ethan shook his head. I do not need to. Lily looked at her father. She recognized that tone. It was the same tone he used whenever conversations drifted toward the parts of his life he refused to discuss. Victoria took a slow breath. This is not about money. Ethan laughed softly. Not mockingly. Just sadly. Everything around that car is about money. The words landed harder than he intended. Victoria looked away briefly. Deep down, she knew he was not entirely wrong. Outside, darkness continued settling across the desert sky. The garage lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Finally, Victoria spoke again. Then let me be honest. Ethan waited. I am running out of options. The confidence was gone now. The executive voice was gone too. For a moment, she sounded less like a billionaire and more like a person carrying an impossible burden. Ethan noticed that as well. People are expecting answers, she said quietly. Investors, partners, media, employees. She looked toward the garage entrance. I cannot remember the last time I slept through the night. Ethan remained silent. Some struggles looked different on the outside, but pressure was pressure. Responsibility was responsibility. He understood that better than most. Victoria reached into her coat pocket and removed a business card. She placed it gently on the workbench. If you change your mind. Ethan did not touch it. Victoria nodded once and turned toward the SUV. The conversation appeared finished. Then Lily spoke. Why are you really here? Both adults looked at her. The question was simple. Honest. The kind of question only a child could ask. Victoria hesitated. Then she answered with equal honesty. Because everyone in that room is getting louder. Her eyes drifted toward Ethan. And sometimes when everyone is shouting, the person who might actually know something is the one saying nothing at all. Neither Ethan nor Lily responded. Victoria climbed back into the SUV. Seconds later, the vehicle disappeared into the growing darkness. The garage became quiet once more. Ethan stared at the business card resting on the workbench. He could have thrown it away. He should have thrown it away. Instead, he found himself looking at it far longer than necessary. And somewhere deep inside, a door he had kept closed for many years shifted slightly for the first time. That night, long after the garage doors had been locked and the town had settled into silence, Ethan Walker sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a small white business card. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of an old wall clock. Lily had already gone to bed. The dishes were washed. The lights were dim. Yet sleep felt impossibly far away. He picked up the card, turned it over, then set it back down again. The simple action repeated itself several times. Not because he was considering a job. Not because he wanted recognition. Because something about the entire situation refused to leave his mind. Across the room sat a narrow wooden cabinet. Inside, hidden beneath old documents and family photographs, rested a sealed storage box he had not opened in years. Ethan looked toward it, then immediately looked away. Some chapters of life were easier left closed. The next morning arrived cool and clear. At the exhibition center, pressure continued building like a storm trapped beneath glass. Television crews crowded the entrances. Automotive bloggers streamed live updates from their phones. Headlines had become increasingly aggressive. Questions replaced optimism. Investors demanded answers. Sponsors demanded results. Nobody seemed interested in patience anymore. Victoria Sterling stood inside a conference room overlooking the main floor. Through the large windows, she could see technicians moving around the motionless vehicle. Every face carried the same exhausted expression. Across the table, Adrian Cross reviewed another stack of reports. "The public is becoming impatient," Victoria said quietly. Adrian barely looked up. "The public does not understand complexity. Neither do our investors." Adrian closed the folder. "You hired me because I solve impossible problems." Victoria held his gaze. "Then solve this one." For the first time, tension flashed across his face. The room fell silent. Neither of them needed to say what everyone already knew. 10 days had become 11. Confidence was fading. Later that afternoon, another round of diagnostics began. More specialists arrived. More equipment filled the floor. New theories appeared. New failures followed. The cycle repeated itself with almost painful predictability. Near the edge of the work area, a young technician named Noah studied the latest data readings. Something bothered him. A small inconsistency hidden among thousands of measurements. He approached Adrian carefully. "Sir, I think we may be focusing on the wrong subsystem." Adrian sighed. "Not this again. But the data keeps pointing somewhere else." Adrian's expression hardened. "The data points where trained professionals interpret it." Noah stepped back immediately. The conversation ended before it truly began. Yet several nearby engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Doubt was spreading. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, Ethan spent the afternoon rebuilding an engine block. The repetitive work usually calmed him. Today it did not. Every time he reached for a wrench, fragments of the Bugatti returned to his thoughts. Every time he focused on another task, a small unanswered question resurfaced. Machines spoke their own language. He had spent most of his life learning how to listen. As evening approached, Lily entered the garage carrying 2 sodas from the diner next door. She handed one to her father and sat on a nearby stool. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "You are still thinking about it." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe. Because you think you know something?" He took a slow drink before answering. "Knowing and proving are different things." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Then why not tell them?" Ethan looked toward the open garage door where sunlight stretched across the pavement. "Because sometimes people do not want answers." Lily frowned. "That does not make sense." "No," Ethan said quietly. "It usually does not." As darkness settled over the town once more, his phone remained untouched on the workbench. Yet less than an hour later, it suddenly lit up. One missed call, then another, then a third, all from the same number. Victoria Sterling. The screen of Ethan Walker's phone glowed softly in the dim light of the garage. 3 missed calls, all from the same person. For several seconds, he simply stared at the display without moving. Outside, the last traces of daylight had disappeared beyond the Arizona horizon. The garage felt smaller at night, quieter, more honest. There was something about silence that made difficult choices impossible to avoid. Across the room, Lily noticed his expression immediately. "It is her again, isn't it?" Ethan slipped the phone back onto the workbench. "Looks like it." Lily waited. "Are you going to call back?" Ethan did not answer right away. He picked up a wrench, then set it down. He checked a repair invoice he had already read twice. Finally, he sighed. "Probably." Lily smiled slightly. "Good." Ethan looked at her. "Good. You have been thinking about that car for 2 days." She shrugged. "You are terrible at pretending." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. A few minutes later, he stepped outside and dialed the number. The call connected before the first ring finished. "Mr. Walker." Victoria's voice carried a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Thank you for calling." Ethan leaned against the side of the garage. "You seem persistent." A brief pause, then a quiet answer. "I do not have much choice anymore." The honesty caught him off guard. Most people in her position hid weakness behind confidence. Victoria seemed too tired for that now. "What happened?" Ethan asked. On the other end of the line came several seconds of silence. Then she answered. "Another failure." The words sounded heavier than they should have. Something went wrong during testing this afternoon. Investors are flying in tomorrow morning. Media crews have doubled. She paused. And Adrian is still insisting we are close. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He knew that tone. The tone of someone trying to convince themselves as much as everyone else. What do you want from me? He asked. One look. That is all. One honest look. The desert wind moved gently through the darkness around him. Somewhere down the road, a truck passed beneath distant streetlights. Ethan remained quiet. Victoria continued. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to promise anything. Just come. Her voice softened. Please. Back inside the garage, Lily pretended not to listen while hearing every word. Ethan finally looked through the doorway toward her, then toward the old storage cabinet standing against the far wall. The cabinet he had avoided opening for years. Tomorrow, he said. The relief on the other end of the line was immediate. Tomorrow is enough. The next morning arrived beneath a sky of bright desert blue. By sunrise, news helicopters already circled above the exhibition center. Television vans lined the entrances. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. What had once been a technical problem now felt like a national event. Inside, pressure filled every corner of the building. Engineers rushed between stations. Executives held emergency meetings. Security personnel managed growing crowds. Yet in the center of everything, the vehicle remained exactly the same. Silent, motionless, untouched by 11 days of effort. Adrian Cross stood before a group of journalists delivering another confident update. Progress is being made, he announced. Complex systems require patience. Cameras flashed. Microphones rose. The performance continued. Not far away, Victoria watched from the edge of the crowd. Her attention was elsewhere. Every few seconds, her eyes drifted toward the main entrance. Waiting, hoping, wondering if Ethan would actually appear. Then shortly after 9 o'clock, a familiar pickup truck rolled into the parking lot. No media convoy. No luxury SUV. No dramatic arrival. Just an aging blue truck carrying a father and his daughter. Ethan parked near the far edge of the property. For a moment, neither he nor Lily moved. The exhibition center looked even larger than before. Crowds pressed against security barriers. Cameras pointed in every direction. It would have been easy to turn around. Easy to leave. Easy to return to the quiet certainty of the garage. Instead, Ethan shut off the engine. Lily looked at him. You nervous? He smiled faintly. A little. Good. Ethan laughed. Why is that good? Because it means you care. Before he could answer, a black SUV approached and stopped beside them. Victoria stepped out immediately. Her expression softened the moment she saw them. Not because she saw a solution. Not because she saw a miracle. Because after 11 days surrounded by noise, she had finally found someone willing to look without pretending to know everything. Yet neither of them noticed the figure standing near the entrance watching from a distance. Adrian Cross had seen the pickup arrive, and the moment he recognized the mechanic from the delivery day, a faint smile appeared on his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man already preparing to dismiss someone before they had spoken a single word. The smile on Adrian Cross's face lasted only a second, but it revealed more than words ever could. He watched Ethan Walker climb out of the faded blue pickup and immediately filed him into a category. Small-town mechanic. Outsider. Unqualified. The kind of judgment that happens in an instant and often says more about the person making it than the person receiving it. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed completely unaware of the attention gathering around him. He closed the truck door, adjusted his work jacket, and glanced toward the massive exhibition center. The building looked even larger up close. Television cameras stood outside like silent sentries. Reporters clustered near the entrance. Security guards moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. It felt less like an automotive event and more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Lily stepped beside her father and slipped her hand into his. Still nervous? She asked. Ethan smiled. A little more now. That means you definitely care. Victoria approached before he could answer. The exhaustion in her eyes remained, but there was something else now. Hope. Careful hope. The kind people protect because they are afraid to lose it. Thank you for coming, she said. Ethan nodded politely. I have not agreed to anything. I know. Her smile was small but genuine. Just looking. Together, they entered the building. Conversations softened as they passed. Not because anyone recognized Ethan, Because people noticed Victoria walking beside him. Curious glances followed them through the hallways. Some wondered if he was a consultant. Others assumed he was another specialist arriving to fail. A few barely noticed him at all. They reached the main exhibition floor where the vehicle sat beneath bright lights. 11 days of effort surrounded it. Diagnostic equipment filled entire sections of the room. Laptops glowed from rolling workstations. Cables stretched across polished floors. Charts covered walls. Thousands of hours of expertise were visible everywhere. And yet the machine remained silent. Ethan stopped several feet away. He did not move closer. He simply looked. Victoria watched him carefully. Adrian watched him even more carefully. "This is the man?" Adrian finally asked. His voice carried enough volume to attract nearby attention. Victoria remained calm. "This is Ethan Walker." Adrian extended a hand without enthusiasm. "Dr. Adrian Cross." Ethan shook it politely. "Nice to meet you." Adrian glanced toward Ethan's grease-stained sleeves. "Victoria tells me you repair vehicles." "Sometimes." The answer sounded almost amusingly simple. Adrian smiled faintly. "Well, that certainly puts 11 days of diagnostics into perspective." A few nearby engineers exchanged uncomfortable looks. The comment was subtle. The message was not. Ethan ignored it completely. He continued studying the vehicle. Adrian seemed irritated by the lack of reaction. "Do you know what you are looking at?" he asked. Victoria immediately sensed the conversation moving in the wrong direction. Ethan finally turned. "A car." Several technicians laughed quietly. Adrian's smile widened. "Only a car." Ethan shrugged. "Most machines are." More laughter followed. "Not cruel. Not yet. But enough. Enough to remind everyone exactly where they believed the hierarchy existed. Specialists at the top. Mechanics at the bottom. Titles above experience. Status above humility." Lily heard every word. She remained silent beside her father, but her grip tightened slightly around her sketchbook. She had seen this before. Not in exhibition centers. Not around million-dollar equipment. But in everyday life. People assuming they understood someone because of how they looked. Ethan, however, seemed completely unaffected. The laughter faded. He looked back toward the vehicle. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then something changed. His expression shifted ever so slightly. Not surprise. Not certainty. Recognition. A tiny detail had caught his attention. Victoria noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Adrian folded his arms. "Please. This should be interesting." Ethan walked slowly around the vehicle. No dramatic gestures. No performance. No attempt to impress anyone. Just quiet observation. He paused near the rear quarter panel. Then near the engine compartment. Then near one of the diagnostic stations. His eyes moved from the machine to the data screen and back again. The room grew quieter. Even Adrian stopped speaking. Finally, Ethan looked toward one of the monitors displaying pages of diagnostic results. "Can I ask a question?" The lead technician nodded cautiously. "Sure." Ethan pointed at a series of readings. "Why are these numbers different?" The technician frowned. "Different from what?" Ethan tapped the screen gently. "Everything else." A silence followed. A very different kind of silence. The technician leaned closer. Then closer still. Around him, several engineers did the same. One by one, their expressions began to change. Not because they had found an answer. Not yet. But because for the first time in 11 days, someone had asked a question none of them had considered. The question lingered in the air long after Ethan Walker asked it. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. Painfully simple. The kind of question experts often overlook when they become trapped inside their own assumptions. Around the diagnostic station, engineers leaned closer to the screen. Fingers moved across keyboards. Data sets were reopened. Reports were cross-referenced. The technician who had first responded to Ethan narrowed his eyes as he reviewed the numbers again. Then his expression changed. Slightly at first. Then dramatically. "Wait," he whispered. Another engineer stepped beside him. "What is it?" The technician pointed toward the readings. These values should not be isolated. More people gathered. Quiet conversations spread through the room. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the atmosphere shifted from frustration to uncertainty. Not certainty. Not success. Just the uncomfortable realization that something important may have been missed. Across the floor, Adrian Cross immediately sensed control slipping away. He walked toward the workstation with measured confidence. "What is happening?" The lead technician hesitated before answering. We are reviewing an inconsistency. Adrian glanced at the screen. We reviewed that 3 days ago. Not this way. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned toward Ethan. One observation does not suddenly invalidate 11 days of professional analysis. Ethan nodded calmly. I agree. The response caught Adrian off guard. There was no challenge. No arrogance. No attempt to prove anything. Just agreement. Somehow that made the situation even more frustrating. Nearby, Victoria watched everything unfold in silence. Her attention was no longer fixed on the vehicle. It was fixed on Ethan, specifically on what he was not doing. He was not seeking credit. He was not drawing attention to himself. He was not acting like a man desperate to be right. The more she observed him, the more unusual he seemed. Most people wanted recognition. Ethan appeared uncomfortable with it. Hours passed. Additional diagnostics began. Teams revisited assumptions that had gone unquestioned for days. Data flowed across screens. Conversations became increasingly focused. Yet despite the growing excitement, Ethan remained near the edge of the room with Lily, observing quietly. At one point, Lily looked up at her father. Do you see it now? Ethan smiled faintly. See what? The problem. He considered the question. Maybe part of it. Only part. The most dangerous mistakes usually hide behind the things we think we already understand. Lily thought about that for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Children often understand wisdom before adults do. Across the exhibition center, however, pressure continued mounting. News of the new discovery had somehow leaked. Reporters demanded updates. Investors requested emergency briefings. Social media exploded with speculation. The crowd outside the building nearly doubled by late afternoon. Every hour increased expectations. Every expectation increased risk. Victoria found herself standing beside Ethan once again near the observation area, overlooking the exhibition floor. Neither spoke for several moments. Below them, engineers moved between workstations like pieces on a giant chessboard. You could have embarrassed him, Victoria said quietly. Ethan looked at her. Who? Adrian. Ethan glanced back toward the floor. Why would I do that? Victoria studied him carefully. Most people would. Most people spend too much time trying to win. The answer lingered between them. For reasons she could not fully explain, it affected her more than she expected. She had spent years surrounded by ambition, competition, ego, success, failure. Yet very few people seemed interested in character anymore. Ethan carried himself differently, as if dignity mattered more than victory. As evening approached, a breakthrough seemed close enough to touch. Engineers moved faster. Conversations grew more urgent. Several technicians even smiled for the first time in days. Yet with every sign of progress came growing tension. Because if the answer truly existed within the area Ethan had pointed out, then an uncomfortable question would follow. How had everyone missed it? Adrian appeared increasingly restless. The certainty that once defined him now felt strained. He reviewed reports repeatedly, asked the same questions multiple times, corrected people unnecessarily. The pressure was beginning to show. Then just before sunset, a senior engineer rushed across the floor carrying a fresh diagnostic report. He stopped beside Victoria. His face was pale, excited, confused. We found something. Every nearby conversation stopped. The engineer looked down at the report in his hands, then toward the silent vehicle resting beneath the lights. But if this is correct, he hesitated. The room seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, his eyes shifted toward Ethan Walker. Then everything we believed about the failure may be wrong. The room stood frozen around a single possibility. Engineers stared at the report. Technicians exchanged uncertain glances. Reporters pressed against security barriers beyond the glass walls, sensing that something important was unfolding. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then the senior engineer cleared his throat. The failure was never where we thought it was. His voice carried across the exhibition floor. More specialists gathered around him. Screens were updated. Data was reviewed again. Every path now pointed toward the same conclusion. 11 days of analysis had been built upon a false assumption. The room did not erupt with excitement. It became quiet. Very quiet. Because everyone understood what that meant. The lead technician slowly turned toward Ethan Walker. You saw it in less than a minute. Ethan shook his head gently. No. The technician frowned. Then how? Ethan looked toward the silent vehicle. I noticed something that did not belong. Nothing more. No speech. No self-congratulation. No attempt to elevate himself. Just a simple answer. Nearby, Adrian Cross stood motionless. The confidence that had filled every interview and every presentation had disappeared. Not because he lacked intelligence. Not because he lacked skill. But because he had forgotten something important. Expertise is valuable. Humility is priceless. For the first time since Ethan arrived, Adrian walked toward him without a smile. Without an audience voice. Without performance. I owe you an apology. The words seemed difficult for him to say. Ethan met his eyes. You do not owe me anything. Adrian looked down briefly. I judged you before I knew you. Ethan nodded. Most people do. There was no bitterness in his voice. Somehow that made the moment even more powerful. Around them, engineers completed the final verification procedures. One by one, systems came online. Diagnostic alerts disappeared from the monitors. The atmosphere changed. Not dramatically, gradually, like a storm finally passing. Then, at last, the lead technician looked toward Victoria Sterling and smiled. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in days. We are ready. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. Every eye focused on the vehicle resting beneath the lights. Victoria stood perfectly still. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Months of planning. 11 days of failure. Endless pressure. All condensed into a single moment. The technician initiated the sequence. A heartbeat later, the vehicle responded. The room filled with the sound everyone had been waiting to hear. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just life returning where silence had existed before. For a second nobody reacted. Then applause spread across the exhibition floor. Engineers hugged. Technicians laughed. Reporters rushed to deliver breaking updates. Relief moved through the building like sunlight after rain. Yet amid all the celebration, Ethan Walker quietly stepped away. Lily followed beside him. Neither seemed interested in cameras. Neither moved toward the crowd. Victoria noticed immediately. She crossed the floor and caught up with them near the exit. You are leaving? Ethan smiled. Looks like you do not need me anymore. Victoria laughed softly through tired eyes. I think I needed you more than the car did. For a moment neither spoke. Then she handed him a small envelope. Ethan glanced down. What is this? An offer. He did not open it. You should at least look. Ethan smiled again and carefully returned it. I appreciate it. Victoria stared at the envelope, now resting back in her hands. You are not even curious? Ethan looked toward Lily. She was standing nearby, smiling quietly. I already have the job I want. Victoria followed his gaze. Something softened inside her. At last she understood. Success had never been what defined him. Character did. Responsibility did. Love did. The things that rarely appear on resumes. A few minutes later, the old blue pickup rolled out of the parking lot beneath the fading Arizona sunset. No cameras followed. No headlines captured the moment. Inside the truck, Lily looked over at her father. You know they are probably talking about you right now. Ethan chuckled. Probably. Does that feel nice? He thought for a moment. Not as nice as getting home in time for dinner. Lily laughed. The truck continued down the highway while the exhibition center slowly disappeared behind them. Back at the venue, people would spend days discussing the mystery, the solution, and the mechanic who saw what everyone else missed. But the truth was never really about a car. It was about dignity, about listening before judging, about remembering that wisdom does not always arrive wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes it arrives in a worn work jacket, carrying years of quiet sacrifice, and asking a simple question nobody else thought to ask. And if this story reminded you of someone who chooses character over recognition, or if you believe quiet strength still matters in a noisy world, share your thoughts below. Stories like these stay alive because people pass them on. And sometimes the greatest lesson is the simplest one of all. Never underestimate the person everyone else overlooks.